Prior to the encounter of Moses with God at Sinai, a weekly day of rest was unheard of in any Near East culture. Now a holy law decreed that everyone, including slaves, was to respect the commandment. The Ten Commandments also recognized the tradition that permitted Hebrews to own slaves themselves.
When we talk about Hebrews as slaves to Hebrews, more typically we're talking about debt slavery. If you fall into debt, a way to take care of your debt is debt slavery. So first we have to remember this is not the kidnapping of persons from one continent to be slaves in a different continent.
In Mesopotamia, you hurt or injured a slave, you would pay damages to their master. In Israel, if you harm a slave, the slave goes free. The Ten Commandments are special because these are the laws given to the first slaves in history who ever had a successful slave rebellion. This is the vision of a liberated community. This is hope we're being shown here in the form of laws.
Another humane commandment, the fifth, also has resonated through time with universal impact. According to many theologians, it can be the most demanding of the 10.
In the Talmud, one of the rabbis asks his students if he knows which is the hardest commandment. And when they say we don't know, he says the hardest commandment is this: honor your father and mother. It means you must give them a sense that they are the reason why you exist in the world, and you have to give them everything that you can without violating your own sense of priorities and integrity. And that is a very difficult balance that we're still looking for in all of our lives.
We know that in some tribal settings they simply abandon their old people as they move on. Not so in Israel. This doesn't just mean be nice to them. It means take care of them when they're old. You don't have the right to abandon them.
Most of the Ten Commandments given Moses are bluntly stated. Honor your father and mother. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. With few words, they clearly express behavior required for the survival of any ethical society, then or today. But there appears to be a striking omission in the presentation of these laws. There is no mention of punishment for their violation. Has the Hebrew God left this an open issue?
When we grow up, we're told that Santa Claus watches. He knows who's been naughty and nice. Very few of us have met anyone, no matter how naughty, that didn't get a visit from Santa Claus. God is not Santa Claus. And the storyline makes it clear that God is slow to anger, but that doesn't mean that God doesn't get angry. God is very forgiving, but that doesn't mean that anything goes.
If the vast, foreboding landscape of the Sinai has yet to yield clues, much less proof, to support the book of Exodus' account of the Ten Commandments, Israel itself has been much kinder to scholars and archaeologists who seek to verify the story. The story on which both a religion and a nation base their identity. Nearly a century ago, an ancient document found its way into the hands of a biblical expert. This became known as the Nash Papyrus. It eventually was authenticated as dating to the 2nd century before Jesus. In it, indications are given that the 10 Commandments were recited in the Second Temple as part of daily prayer. The papyrus thus became the first tangible evidence to corroborate the Scripture's story of Sinai. While it doesn't prove the ritual had been practiced for 1,000 years prior to the 2nd century, when the commandments were first given, it does suggest that the legacy of Moses had uncommon staying power and impact. Specific information regarding the 40 years the Israelites spent in the Sinai so far has eluded investigators. However, substantial knowledge of both urban and nomadic cultures of 3,500 years ago has aided insight into the meaning of and the reasons for the 10 Commandments themselves. The law against adultery was not based on moral principle alone, as it is today.
Adultery is the coupling with another man's wife. It is directed towards the man as the primary personality whom the law addresses. It does not cover a girl who has not been betrothed or married. That would be fornication. But adultery needs to be understood in the context of property law. Another man's wife is legally his property, and you may not take it against his will.
Bearing false witness against one's neighbor. Why was this considered among the 10 most serious offenses?
I understand bearing false witness as bringing a charge against another that is untrue. Human relations were not secured if a person's word was not his bond. There's this whole understanding of the word in the Israelite tradition. You know, when a person spoke his word in a sense embodied his personality, and it couldn't be recalled.
You shall not covet your neighbor's house or anything belonging to your neighbor. Exodus 20:17.
The 10th commandment is considered by many the most provocative of all that were received by Moses and the Israelites. No other dealt with what one thought, what was most likely in one's subconscious.
There was the assumption that if you coveted in your head, what happened in your head would move to your hands. And so coveting, while we might think of it as an obscure law that really we can't deal with because it's in our heads, is one of the most important of the 10 Commandments. Because once you start wanting what somebody else has, and that somebody else is someone who's in your group, then you quit being a group.
Adultery, bearing false witness, coveting what your neighbor has, all sins in the eyes of a God whose commands have been given for posterity. But no punishments are proscribed if his directives are ignored. How can they be laws if there are no consequences for those who break them? Certainly, other books of the Hebrew Bible list hundreds of punishments for hundreds of crimes. Sacrilegious or antisocial behavior, from improper rituals to incest, is condemned, calling forth punishments ranging from fines to stoning to death. Yet in this covenant God made with the Israelites regarding a fundamental code of behavior, there is no mention of retribution for those who fail to obey. Biblical scholars differ in their understanding of this puzzling question.
It is not a list of laws that some civil or religious authority is meant to go out and enforce. When one violates God's will, as expressed in the commands, it is a violation of the relationship. Just as when we hurt someone whom we love, our response of disappointment in ourselves and pain at the hurt we have caused, guilt and shame are appropriate responses.
These are laws before Freud. The ancient Israelites did not keep these laws for fear of guilt. They kept these laws for fear of loss of identity. If you broke the law, you didn't feel guilty, they put you outside the group. Are you part of the chosen people, or are you outside?
Among the countless mysteries of the Bible, one that continues to perplex scholars is why Moses chooses to repeat the commandments aloud just as he brings his people within sight of the promised land.
Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you from there with a mighty hand. Deuteronomy 5:15.
This thought, now expressed by Moses when he quotes the fourth commandment, does not appear in the text of the book of Exodus. Is the integrity of the commandments somehow affected by this and other similar discrepancies?
There is a school